Hello my dear friends, you're in the military with Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Today is the beginning of the 11th of March of 2025, which means that the negotiation process between the United States of America and Ukraine has begun on the territory of Saudi Arabia. Zelensky and his team have already arrived on the territory of Saudi Arabia, but according to information we have, Zelensky is not going to take part in the negotiation process between the delegation of the United States of America and Ukrainian delegation. He is going to have a meeting with Saudi Arabia representatives. Most likely he's going to talk different questions about money, about supply and support. Maybe he is going to stay in Saudi Arabia until they receive, the Ukrainian delegation will receive some proposal from the United States of America. When talking about the United States, yesterday in the evening of the 10th of March, they have already gave us some updates regarding the upcoming questions, about the questions they're going to discuss with the Ukrainians. Tomorrow, the US and Ukraine will discuss territorial issues. This is a very important issue in Saudi Arabia, says Trump's special envoy. The talks will also discuss security protocols, the transfer of American intelligence, and an agreement on minerals. Witkoff added that Washington expects significant progress from these talks. In particular, the Americans hope to sign an agreement on minerals. During the talks, Ukraine will propose establishing a ceasefire at sea, a ban on long-range strikes, and will insist on the release of prisoners, Kyiv media reported citing sources. So, as you can see, Zelensky was planning to visit Saudi Arabia having at least two strong cards. The first strong card from the Ukrainian side was, of course, the territories they control, let's say, inside of Russian Federation. And we are talking, of course, about the city of Sudzha, its agglomeration, and a part of Kursk region. But the problem is that right before the beginning of this negotiation process, the Ukrainians, by the beginning of the 11th of March of 2025, have lost almost every single square kilometer in this territory, and most likely by the end of this week, by the end of, let's say, the first half of March, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this territory completely, which means that they are going to lose one of the most powerful and important cards they used to have. So when talking about the Sudzha direction, as you can see, during the previous night, we got additional changes on the map in Russian favor. Let's compare the map between the dates. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 10th of March. I believe that it's better even to start earlier. So this is the situation by the end of the 8th of March, when by the end of the day, when the Russians launched their Spartan offensive operation, their special operation, when they moved through the 15 kilometers of pipe and landed behind the Ukrainian positions. And this is already the situation by the end of the 9th of March. As you can see, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. We didn't have a lot of geolocations, so most of them territories were colored as a contested area. By the end of the 10th of March, we got more or less reliable information from different reliable sources about the situation on the ground that allowed us to change the map completely in Russian favor. And the most of the territories, as you can see, were already colored as the territories under complete Russian control. And by the beginning of 11th of March, we continue receiving different updates about additional progress on the ground. And by the morning of the 11th of March, the Russians managed to establish complete control by the village by the name of Kazachya Loknya. So this is the last village to the north of the settlement, to the north of Sudzha agglomeration. And now, if the Russians continue moving further in the southern direction, we're going to see the first battle, or the battle for the Sudzha itself. The report about the fall of Kazachya Loknya was published by the official Telegram channel of the Group of Forces North. They stated this morning on the 11th of March of 2025. Furthermore, by the evening of the 10th of March of 2025, the Russians reported about complete control over the settlement by the name of Kalmakov, Bondarenko, so all the settlements and villages on the eastern flank of the Sudzha agglomeration. And also during the previous nights, we got several more reports that were published by different sources that have relations with probably the Group of Forces North or with the soldiers on the ground. And according to them, the Russians intensified their their activities on the southern flank of Sudzha agglomeration. And during the previous night, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Kurilovka, and according to several pro-Russian resources, the Russians are about to finish their clearing of the village by the name of Milovoy and this forest. So summarizing everything, maybe today the Russians will take under complete control all territories that are located inside of this red line. But telling the truth, it is already doesn't matter whether the Russians are going to do this or that offensive operation, this maneuver or that maneuver. It doesn't matter. Obviously, we understand that Putin wants to take this strong card from Zelensky's hands and to restore control over Sudzha direction, because according to the original plan of Zelensky several months ago, he stated that he wanted to change these territories for some territories that were already captured by the Russians. And we believe that Zelensky wanted to change Sudzha and Sudzha region, for example, for the territory of the city of Energodar with the Zaporozhka nuclear power plant, because for Ukraine it is very important to save control over the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. But now we understand that Zelensky will not be able to do this. More and more sources reported that Ukrainians stop listening to their commanders, continue retreat process towards the border. The Russians are dealing the Ukrainians significant damage. Hundreds of drones are flying along the main supply and evacuation roads. The Ukrainians suffer significant losses, and the most important, this morning on the 11th of March of 2025, the Russians began bombing and attacking the Sudzha agglomeration with everything they have, which means that most likely today the Russians will try to break through the Ukrainian defense belt once again and to defeat the Ukrainians completely and to force them to start running away from Sudzha agglomeration. Very likely, and there are very high chances that by the end of the 11th of March or by the beginning of the 12th of March, the Ukrainians would abandon their positions in Sudzha completely, because as you can see, according to this configuration of the line of combat contact, the Russians control every single square kilometer around the city of Sudzha, and there are very high chances if Ukrainians don't make decision today, they will be caught in cauldron by the Russians by the morning of the 12th of March. So the Russians continue their offensive. Some of the Ukrainians already managed to evacuate from Sudzha, but the problem is that they can't use vehicles. They can evacuate and escape cauldron just on their own, and so that's why they are very exhausted and very tired when they get the settlement of Yunakivka. And now the Ukrainian commanders in this area faced another problem. Now they need to think how to stretch these people, how to stretch these soldiers, how to concentrate them, how to give them some some places to sleep, to get some rest. And this situation led to another problem. Currently the settlement of Yunakivka is overpopulated by the Ukrainian soldiers, and that's why this city, this town, has become a very perfect target for the Russian aviation, for the Russian Iskander missiles, and so on. And as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, the Russians were bombing and attacking the settlement, bombing and attacking barracks, different positions where the Ukrainians were trying to concentrate those Ukrainians who escaped the Sudzha and the Sudzha direction, which means that the Ukrainians continue suffering losses. To stabilize the situation, the Ukrainians were trying to bring as many as possible air defense systems, because they understand that the Russians first of all will try to attack the retreating Ukrainian forces with aviation, with missiles. So that's why it's time to improve and reinforce their air defense systems here, with the purpose to secure the sky and allow and to create a safe corridors for Ukrainians who are currently trying to save their lives by running away from the territory of Sudzha. So that's why the Russians began intensify their intelligence activities deep inside of the Sumy region, with the purpose to discover Ukraine air defense systems and destroy. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to bring additional Buk M1 air defense system as close as possible to the line of combat contact, but this system was discovered by the Russians, and as a result of Iskander strike was destroyed. So the next days are going to be much more difficult for the Ukrainians than these days and than the yesterday, or today, or the day before yesterday, the next days are very important, because if the Ukrainians are not able to stabilize the situation or to reorganize themselves, most likely the Russians, after the fall of Sudzha, would continue offensive operation, and very likely the Russians would be able to get as close as possible to the city of Sumy. Now Zelensky has several options. First of all, he can try to send forces in the side of Sudzha with the purpose to stabilize the situation, or to concentrate them along the border with the purpose not to allow the Russians to break through. But the problem is that Ukrainians, since the beginning of the battle for Sudzha, haven't managed to prepare their positions and defense line in this part. So that's why if they even bring somebody, they will not be able to hold positions for a very long period of time. Another thing that Ukrainians can do, they can begin another offensive operation, let's say in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Tyotkina. For example, in this video we can see how the Ukrainians began bombing and attacking the border and the let's say the line of combat contact between the Russians and the Ukrainians, with different bombs, with artillery and so on. And maybe in the very near future the Ukrainians will try to attack in this area, but not with the purpose to establish control over Tyotkina or to break through towards the settlement of Glushkova. The Ukrainians would try to attack in this area just with the purpose to slow down the Russians in this part, to force the Russians to, let's say, to introduce additional reserves in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation, which will allow the Ukrainians to escape the Sudzha with minimal losses. But most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to do this, because currently they have lots of problems with intelligence, with missiles, with arms, and so on. The second strong card that Zelensky has is air defense. Not air defense, is let's say long-range attacks deep inside of the territory of Russia. For example, today Zelensky in Saudi Arabia is going to suggest to establish ceasefire, to stop attacking, let's say on the sea, in the air, and so on. And to show that Zelensky has a very strong card, this night between the 10th and the 11th of March, he attacked the territory of Russia, and he attacked the territory of Moscow with a significant number of drones. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation this morning has already published their reports regarding the situation. And they stated that over the course of the past night, air defense systems on duty intercepted and destroyed 337 Ukrainian drones. And obviously, this is the biggest number of drones that's been used by the Ukrainians since the beginning of the special military operation. And this is the message from Zelensky, that despite the fact that we lost Sudzha, we still have a very strong card, and we are talking about drones. So we demand, and this is our position, that if you want to establish a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, first of all, we should establish ceasefire on drones attacks, because we also have something to show you. But we don't believe and we don't show that the Russians are going to accept this. They will continue until the Ukrainians will accept everything that the Russians demand. Furthermore, during the previous nights, according to information we have, the Russians attacked the city of Odessa, where the Ukrainians are trying where Ukrainians have, let's say, production centers for these drones. When talking once again about Moscow, these 300 drones managed to deal significant damage, but basically to the civilian infrastructure. As you can see, lots of cars were damaged, lots of civilian buildings were damaged and destroyed. We are not talking about military objects. The Ukrainians during the previous night were trying to destroy as many as possible civilian objects, and the main purpose of this is to force the Russians, the civilians, people to publish as many as possible videos, which will increase this effect on attack with drones on the Russian civilian infrastructure. And this is something like a strong position that Zelensky believes he has during this meeting in the Saudi Arabia. Anyway, today we're going to understand a lot, but obviously this meeting is not going to be finished in Ukrainian favor, and basically due to the critical situation on the Sudzha direction. Now let's move further and let's discuss several more directions where we got additional updates. According to different sources, the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation on the northern Kupiansk direction. This information was confirmed by neutral mappers. We don't have any additional changes, just neutral mappers confirmed information that was published yesterday by pro-Ukrainian sources. As for the Toriez direction, the Russians continue their counter-offensive operation. Currently, the very heavy clashes on the territory of the Zabalka district. The Russian sources published video how they were counter-attacking in this area, forcing the Ukrainians to fall back. So we see that after the Russian defense collapsed in this area, the Russians managed to stabilize the situation, and now the Russians are trying to restore control over the territories they lost during Ukraine counter-offensive operation. As for the Pokrovsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we continue receiving different updates from the territory of Shevchenka. There are very heavy clashes, and we believe that this map and this configuration doesn't have anything with reality. We believe that currently the settlement of Shevchenka is in the gray zone, because every single day we receive different videos from different parts that confirms that currently there is something like a mix, and probably sometimes either both the Russians and the Ukrainians don't know for sure which building belongs to the Russians and which building belongs to the Ukrainians. The clashes in this area continues, but we see that the same story as we can see right now in the city of Toriez. The Russians are trying to stabilize the situation and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.